Lend-Lease and military aid to the Allies in the early years of World War II. This Lend-Lease was a law introduced in December 1940 during the period of Roosevelt, and under this law, USA was providing military aid to the Allies and especially to the UK. And this act was introduced to make some relaxations or easy for US to help allies in the Second World War. As the Second World War began in 1939, the US began to provide significant supplies and other assistances to allies in September 1941. Much of this aid goes to UK and other nations already at war with Germany and Japan through this innovative program, and that was known as Lend-Lease. There were a number of hurdles to introduce this program or this act. And Roosevelt was willing to provide aid to allies and UK. For that, first when war broke out in Europe in September 1939, President Roosevelt declared that while the US will remain neutral in law, he could not ask every American remain neutral in thought as well. Roosevelt himself made significant effort to help nations engaged in struggle against Nazi Germany and wanted to extend a helping hand to those countries that lacked the supplies necessary to fight against the Germans. The UK in particularly desperately needed help as it was short of hard currency to pay for military goods, food and raw material it needed from USA. Now, to provide this assistance, there were three main barriers: the barrier from law, military, and above all, public opinion. These three were the major barriers or checks in the way of act. There were two acts in the statute of US that provides checks or that restrict US to provide assistance to the allies. The first one was the Neutrality Act of 1939. According to the Neutrality Act of 1939, belligerents could purchase war material from US but on cash and carry base only. That is, they have to pay and take the war material from US. And the second barrier, the legal barrier, was the Johnson Act of 1934. The Johnson Act of 1934 prohibited the countries that had not repaid US loans during World War I. That's according to the Johnson Act of 1931. If a country has not repaid the debt or the loan that was taken from US, will not be given a second loan. And UK had already taken loans from US in First World War and they had not returned those loans. So according to this act, the Johnson Act of 1934, US was committed not to provide loan to the UK. This was the second legal barrier. And there was opposition from military as well. Military was also not in favor of providing aid to UK. The American military opposed diversion. It's because the American military opposed the diversion of military assets to UK. The Army Chief of Staff, General Marshall, anticipated that Britain would surrender following the collapse of France, and thus the American supplies would go to the hands of Germans. And so Marshall and others therefore argued that US national security would be better served by reserving military supplies in defense of Western Hemisphere. So there was a strong opposition from military circles against providing any assistance to the UK. And above all, the most important check was the public opinion. Many Americans opposed US involvement in another war, even though American public opinion generally supported British rather than Germans. But they were not in favor of providing assistance to any belligerent nation. Since the people were not in favor, military was not in a mood to provide assistance to UK, and there were legal checks. So President Roosevelt had to develop an initiative that was consistent with legal prohibition against granting credit, satisfactory to military leadership, and acceptable to public opinion that generally resisted the US involvement in European conflicts. Now let's see the road to act, how the road was set for the act. An agreement was signed on 2nd September 1940. We called it Destroyers for Bases Agreement. Under the terms of the agreement, the US gave British more than 50 outdated destroyers in exchange for 99-year lease for the lease to territory in Newfoundland and Siberian, which would be used as US air and naval bases. Churchill had originally requested that Roosevelt provide the destroyers as gift, but President knew that American public and military would oppose that. He therefore decided that a deal that gave US long-term access to British bases would be justifiable as essential to the security of Western Hemisphere. So an agreement was signed on 2nd September 1940. Under this act, US provide outdated 50 destroyers to UK, and against those destroyers, UK provide military bases in Siberia and Newfoundland that could be used by US that could be used by US for the security of Western Hemisphere, and this was now justifiable to the military and public. In December 1940, Churchill informed Roosevelt that British were no longer able to pay for supplies. Then on 17th December 17, Roosevelt proposed a new initiative that would be known as Lend-Lease. US would provide Great Britain with supplies it needed to fight Germany, but would not insist upon being paid immediately. Instead, US would lend the supplies on deferring payment. When and again, when payments eventually did take place, the emphasis would not be on the payments in dollars. The tensions and instability engendered by inter-allied war debts in 1920s and 1930s had demonstrated that it was unreasonable to expect that virtually bankrupt European nations would be able to pay for every item they had purchased from the US. Instead, payment would primarily take the form of a consideration granted by Britain to UK. So, after many months of hard negotiations, US and Britain agreed in Article number 7 of the Lend-Lease Agreement. And now what Article number 7 is saying. According to the Article number 7 of the Lend-Lease Agreement, uh, the Britain will provide considerations to UK in post-war period. Now, what type of consideration? This was again a question. and this was defined after a long negotiation that this consideration would be a joint action directed towards the creation of liberalized economic order in post-war or world. That was the Britain will support UK, or sorry, Britain will support US in post-war period to make an economic order that will be favorable to US. So this was a point included, and that point helped later on US to monitor or to develop an economic order that would be favorable to US. And for this assurance that European nations will support US to develop an economic order that will be favorable to US in post-war period, US start providing assistance to UK and other European nations that were involved in war against Axis. And this was not something US was providing free gifts or just for the considerations. Rather, US was thinking that US would be able to defeat Germany without involving in war, without direct involvement in war. And that was also the objective of Roosevelt. Thank you for joining. Take care. Goodbye.